Joe Tucker, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about what is happening not only in law firms across the country, but the whole judiciary system.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for having me here. It's a troubled time that we're having here in America in the judiciary and the attacks that are happening against lawyers and law firms by the administration.
Well, you, I know, are president of the International Academy of Trial Lawyers. Tell me what that institution does and what it's all about.
We are an elite trial lawyer group, invitation only, 500 lawyers here in America.
Wow, that is elite.
Yes, we're plaintiffs, defendants, prosecution, defense, and we also are in 34 countries in America. We have fellows. One of our major guiding principles is that we support the rule of law. And in prior years, we were actually going about spreading the rule of law in other countries and helping with democratic institutions. Now we find ourselves in need of help here in America with the defense of the rule of law, which is a very unique situation.
Let's talk about that unique situation. Big picture. When you look back at the last several months of this second Trump administration, what are your thoughts?
That in this one instance, he's a man of his word. He said that he was going to retaliate against people, and he has retaliated against people. He's retaliated against law firms, and he's attacking the rule of law. He's attacking judges. He's doing, and this word cannot be overused. It's unprecedented what's happening. Certain law firms have been fighting back. Judges have been issuing their opinions despite intimidation, despite being called out by name. They're doing the things that we expect them to do, and they are holding up right now. They are the dam that is stopping the breach of the rule of law.
You're also the founder of your own law firm in Philadelphia. It's called Tucker Law Group, and you recently released a statement in response to the administration's actions. This is what it said. We call on every law firm, bar association, and lawyer, regardless of political affiliation, to voice their opposition. The legal profession cannot afford for you to remain silent in the face of this blatant attempt to chill advocacy and undermine the bar's independence. If these attacks stand unchallenged, we allow a foundational pillar of our democracy to crumble. This is a defining moment. We will not yield, we will not be silent, and we will not stop defending the rule of law. We will agitate. Where do you stand? Where does your firm stand? Why did you feel, Joe, compelled to issue that statement?
All lawyers should issue that statement. All lawyers should follow that. That is who we are fundamentally. We all took an oath to be lawyers, that we would defend the rule of law and we would defend the Constitution. And with certain firms who have agreed because of pressure, some without pressure, they've agreed to follow certain directives of the administration. It is not what we are to do as lawyers. We are to advocate and we are to agitate. And we're all familiar with the Shakespearean phrase, the first thing we do is kill all the lawyers, which is oftentimes used as a joke. But what that actually, the actual setting of that is if we get rid of the lawyers, the guardians of the rule of law, we then can have a totalitarian and a dictator. And that's why it's important that we speak up. And what we lawyers have are rhetoric. We can talk, we can advocate, we can speak out as we're doing, and that's what we must do. I'm not suggesting that we do a January 6th and we attack the Capitol. I can't imagine us with our Brooks Brothers suits on climbing over gates. That's not the point that I'm making. But the point that I am making is that we can persuade through persuasion and through rhetoric, public opinion. And I often say that if we have one voice speaking, that's good. Two people become a crowd. More people become a movement, and a movement changes things. And lawyers, we are now seeing with the courts and the court granting the recent opinion that said that what the administration was doing specifically against the law firm Perkins Coie, that the administration had violated their constitutional rights, both their First Amendment rights and their Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights of due process, or Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights of due process. These are good things. And these are things that we lawyers need to speak out. All our websites need to have that. We need to talk to our clients, and we need to let our clients know that this is not, and I want to be clear about this, Katie, this is not a Democratic issue. This is not a Republican issue. This is a democracy issue.
What do you think the end game is? You talked about that Shakespearean setting, but explain why the legal system and really lawyers themselves provide a bulwark against, um, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, people who are basically doing whatever they want, whether it's legal or not.
Well, I think a most basic thing is people need to understand civics, and we have co-equal branches of the government. We have the legislative branch, we have the executive branch, and we have the judiciary. Without the judiciary there, then we just have the executive and the legislative branch. We can generally agree that Congress has abandoned its job. These issues have been happening through executive orders, not through bills passed by Congress or the Senate, but singularly by the president. What we have to do is to stop this because we do not have a dictator. And that's what the Constitution, that's one of the fundamental principles. America had just fought a war against a king. And that's what the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that's what that was about, stopping exactly what is trying to be done right now. A single individual or a small group of individuals deciding who can speak, what they can speak about, who they can represent, and what they should be saying in court. A court is a place where all of us can address our issues.
Let's talk about the law firm specifically, Joe. I know that very early on in his second administration, Donald Trump targeted a number of law firms. It was not because of any illegal conduct, but it was on their past clients and political affiliations. Explain what the criteria appeared to be for the White House putting pressure on these specific firms.
It was pure retribution for clients and positions that they had taken. And that's what the courts have said. You cannot do that as the administration, as the president. The president cannot use that power to silence controversial or people who have been adverse to the administration. My very own firm, we do some immigration litigation. So we have been adverse to the United States. A full democracy allows people to test democracy and to see what the rule of law is. And to stop and to chill lawyers from doing that, that has a far-reaching effect. And part of that also has been when, and there are over 200 lawsuits, I think, you begin to lose count against the administration for various things that they've done. And when the administration attempts to intimidate judges, that's also having a chilling effect. Fortunately, despite intimidation, despite pizzas being sent to judges' houses or judges' relatives' houses with the name of the son of a slain federal court judge, despite that, the judges have stood there and they've done that. We never thought there would be a day that a president would stand behind the seal of the White House, of the President of the United States, and chastise a judge simply because of his or her opinion, or someone who's not even been elected to say that we need to impeach judges merely because he does not like a decision the judge has made. So the law firms that stood up and said, no, we are not going to capitulate, we're going to fight, those firms need to be applauded.
Let's talk about the firms that did capitulate and why. How many have agreed so far to the demands that were put on them by the White House to stop well, I think it wasn't even to stop representing, it was because of past representation, right? For a firm that, say, represented Hillary Clinton, right? What were some of the other clients that for whom law firms were punished?
Well, those were whether or not they represented the former FBI director who did the investigation, the impeachment
Oh, right.
of President Trump at that time, for any number of positions they had taken on immigration. The criteria was simply that you had taken a position adverse to the president during his first administration, or an attorney at your firm had helped prosecute the president. It is pure and simple retaliation. And some of the firms gave in. Some of the firms went to the White House before even being threatened, and they agreed to do it. They agreed to wipe out DEI. They agreed to $100 million in the pro bono services that the president would select. This is outrageous that you would have a president select for you the types of services that you were doing. The firms have already been doing pro bono services. They've been, but now to have someone dictate to you the type of pro bono services that you're going to do, it's outrageous.
So, how many firms in all capitulated to the president's demands?
I think there has been a total of 9 thus far, but each one is bigger than the other. And let's be clear about this. These are billion-dollar firms. They're not making $100,000 a year. They're not making millions. These are billion-dollar firms. Fortunately, some of the lawyers and associates at the firm, some of the partners and associates have said, I can't be a part of this. And they've left the firm, they've started their own practices, or they've spoken up. Because you should not be able to dictate who we're representing or how we're representing. It's almost as if someone said to you, Katie, we want you to have Pam Bondi on this show. And here's what you're going to talk to her about.
I might interview Pam Bondi.
And that would be a good thing if you chose to interview Pam Bondi. I would love to hear what she has to say. But I would not, and I think you'd agree with me, you would not want someone to dictate to you. You are to have Pam Bondi on the show.
Obviously.
These are the questions that you're going to ask her.
I would not do that under any circumstances.
But that's exactly what these law firms have agreed to. And that's the problem with it.
My understanding, Joe, and you're much more involved in this than I am by a mile, but that some of the firms initially tried to get together to have strength in numbers, to stand up against the president. And there was a lot of wobbling among some of these firms and some of the leadership of the firms. What happened and why did they wobble?
Some people would say, and I might be agreeable to this, it was about money, it was about protection of their interests, and some firms said it was about protection of clients. But you have to ask yourself, if you won't stand up and defend yourself, what are you going to do for a client? And I think that was the question. But I think there was a calculation made by the firms that it wasn't worth the risk. There's been some blowback now to some of these firms who did capitulate because corporations and clients have said, hey, why didn't you stand up? Why didn't you do like these other firms? Why didn't you do like Williams and Connolly and Perkins and Coy or Sussman Godfrey? I think when Sussman Godfrey was hit with one of these orders or when they were approached, within moments, the full partnership said, no, we're not going to do this. Sussman Godfrey only goes to their trial firm. They only go to trial. For the administration to say you are now banned from a courthouse is essentially say we've taken away your livelihood. There was no question of what they were going to do. And it's firms like that that need to be applauded.
What about the demands about somehow working with the government or working for companies that had contracts with the government or representing them?
Well, there were a couple of aspects about that. One, they were banned from getting certain information from the government. So, for example, if you are defending someone who is indicted by the government, you would be prohibited from getting information. Number two, you're banned from being in a federal courthouse. So how do you adequately represent your client? Number three, they wanted them to disclose the contracts that they had with governmental or governmental agencies. This, again, is inhibiting their ability to do their livelihood. It's prohibiting their ability to represent clients. And it's prohibiting clients from picking the lawyers of their choice, which was one of the issues that happened in the D.C. District Court when the judge said, no, you're inhibiting an attorney-client relationship there, and we will not allow that to happen also.
What was the most surprising firm for you, Joe? You work with all these people from firms all over the country. What firm made you scratch your head and say, I can't believe they're doing this?
Every one of them. Every one of them. They all had the intellect and the power to fight against this administration. The firms that decided to fight against them are no bigger or no smaller, no different than these other firms. You have to imagine that some of this, and as I'll talk about the DEI issue, it was performative. And if given an opportunity to do this, they said, okay, we're going to scrub DEI away. We're not going to fight against this. And there may have been a political calculus for these firms, but each one has surprised me.
Let's talk about DEI while we're on the subject. That was used as a tool or a weapon against these firms. And in some cases, as we've discussed, these firms agreed to abandon their DEI initiatives. What was your reaction to that? And as you said, it was performative, but it does change the nature of these firms. And why were they so willing to abandon this?
Because they were never committed to it in the first instance. And I've had the pleasure to represent, and I'm currently representing, some DEI officers at some major firms whose jobs went from Friday, they were doing a great job, to Monday, your performance is no longer good and we're going to let you go. So what this represents is an attack on a fair America, an attack on America that integrates everyone into America. It's an attack on these law firms, bringing in people who are diverse, who add to the dialogue, who add to the intellect of the firms. The firms obviously were doing this because that was the flavor of the day for them. And now that we have a president who's bringing in Afrikaners under immigration status, is denying
White South Africans.
Yes, white South Africans, denying true refugees. He's kicking out Afghans who helped us during the Afghan war. He's sending them back where we know what's going to happen to them.
And they're under grave threat.
Yes, these brave men and women, when we were fighting the war, they helped protect American soldiers. And this is how we're paying them back. There are refugees all around the world. Yet, this administration has chosen to bring in these white South Africans because they're, according to the president, they're being persecuted.
Kimberly Crenshaw wrote an excellent essay for Time magazine, the law professor who really, I think, taught critical race theory, which was much maligned and misinterpreted in terms of what it actually is. And we don't have time to get into the whole practice and the whole kind of discipline of critical race theory. But it's hard to interpret any of this as anything more than racism. Pure and simple, just complete and utter racism.
And that's the long answer, and that's the short answer. But the problem with your statement and my agreement with it is that it's so complex, and to peel that layer down to the layer of the onion, you have to see what is really going on. But people just don't want to listen to that, and it's easier to find something to divide people than to bring them together. It's one of the plans of the playbook that helped get him elected. If you remember, inflation was going down, prices would be cheaper the next day. None of these things has he done. But what he did do was he played race cards, he played them versus us cards. So yes, it's pure and simple racism, but you'd have to do more than be on TikTok and to be on X to understand this. And the American psyche is no longer where we want to have deep discussions. We're promoting almost an anti-intellectual atmosphere which is going on, which is also goes back to the first thing we do is kill all the lawyers, because they wanted an ignorant population that you could have a ruler, because there would be no one to criticize, no one to talk about what critical race theory means, what DEI means, what full inclusion looks like. And it's not a zero-sum game.
Let's go back and talk a little bit about the law firms, because Paul Weiss was one of the first
Yes.
to capitulate. And in a firm-wide email, the chair of Paul Weiss, Brad Karp, wrote that, quote, the executive order could very easily have destroyed our firm. Do you think those fears are and were valid?
I think the law firms who fought against the executive order has shown that they're not valid. For them to say it would have destroyed the firm is for them to say that money means more to us. I think he further went on to say that he was concerned about the mailman and the other people who were there. So they go from making $5 million a year to $2 million a year. These partners were making, I don't mean to be critical of them, because they've made the decision for whatever reason they've made it as issued in a statement. Whether you agree with that or not, that's for your individual listeners to make a decision. I don't happen to agree with them, but I understand why they made it. I would not have done it. I think they were wrong for doing it, but that's my personal opinion. I don't think it would have destroyed the firm. I think it would have showed the firm, I think it would have shown that they had strength. I think it would have shown why we became lawyers. And that's the reason why many people became lawyers, to fight injustice, to litigate. You don't often see people saying, oh, I want to be a lawyer because I want to be a millionaire. If you talk to people, young people in high school and college, why do you want to be a lawyer? And they will throw out to you the great lawyers of the time. They will talk to you about the things that lawyers have done, where they've championed justice. Whether we're going as far back as President Adams when he defended the British during the Boston Tea Party, and that was an unpopular thing. One of the big things that we celebrate in Philadelphia, there was a lawyer by the name of Andrew Hamilton, not Alexander Hamilton, but Andrew Hamilton, who came here to New York to defend a First Amendment case because no lawyer in New York would do it. That's why we became lawyers, to stand up for the voiceless, to give voice to the voiceless. That's why we did it. If we make money, and I've made a great living, and many of us lawyers do make a great living, but there are any number of lawyers, public defenders, people who are doing pro bono work, people who are working in social services who aren't making a good living or barely making it.
Yeah.
Those are the lawyers that would stand up, because it's more than just about money sometimes. It has to be more than just about money.
And you say that some of the lawyers and firms that did acquiesce are facing repercussions. I know they've been criticized. I know some people have left the firm. People have spoken out. What do you know about sort of retention rates among those firms who have agreed to Trump's demands?
Well, I know anecdotally from speaking to some law students are going through the query of, do I go to one of these firms that capitulated, even though it's standing against what the principles that I have?
And a lot of them were highly, desirable firms to go
Yes.
to, right?
From what I understand, and this again is anecdotally, is that students are still going there and they're saying, I'll go there, I'll train for a few years, and then I'll leave. Whether or not that is or isn't true, I don't know that to be sure. But what I do know is you'll at least understand that you're going into a business.
Ironically, do you think some of the firms that capitulated to the administration's demands might be hurt financially by those decisions?
I think at the end of the day, yes. Two things I can point to. One is that there was an amicus brief filed by a number of former general counsels of large corporations in support of Perkins Coie. Anecdotally, a large corporation recently took away a very significant piece of litigation from one of the firms that agreed with to go along with what the president said and transferred it to a different firm. And I think you're going to see those types of actions happen because corporations appreciate that diversity matters. Corporations appreciate that the rule of law matters, because corporations depend on consistency in the law. So they also have an interest in making sure that the rule of law is protected, defended, and promoted.
Let's talk about the firm that did successfully challenge Trump's order in court. Earlier this month, U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell struck down Trump's executive order targeting Perkins Coie. Is that
Yes.
how? Mm-hmm. And in her ruling, she wrote, "No American president has ever before issued executive orders like the one at issue in this lawsuit. In purpose and effect, this action draws from a playbook as old as Shakespeare, who penned the phrase, 'The first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers.'" And you mentioned this case earlier, but what does Perkins Coie's strategy tell us about the weaknesses of what Trump is attempting to do?
First, I want to give a big shout out to Williams and Connolly, and I'm going to answer your question in a moment.
And by the way, I have to add that my late husband was an associate at Williams and Connolly before we chose and had the opportunity to move to New York. I still know many people at that firm. It is a firm of the utmost integrity and character.
Without question.
And I'm so proud of them, too, and so proud that my late husband, Jay, worked there.
When at the International Academy of Trial Lawyers' most recent meeting, there was a lawyer inducted into the academy. When his firm was announced, Williams and Conley, we did something that I've never seen before. He got a standing ovation just because he worked at Williams and Conley. And that's how much lawyers appreciate what Williams and Conley has done, and what Perkins Coie has done, and what Sussman Gottfried and all the firms who have fought against this. But what the judge's order shows is that the Constitution does matter. That we are going to make the president, this president, every president, going back to even Richard Nixon, who did not like some of the Supreme Court rulings. We're going to make you follow the rule of law. It talks about that the First Amendment is important, that the selection of counsel is important, that you have to have, and who thought in 2025 we would be talking about the term due process? I mean, something as fundamental as due process, we're talking about in 2025, and whether the administration is giving due process, whether it's to immigrants who are here illegally, or whether or not it's a law firm, that we're talking about due process. That's unheard of, Katie.
In a recent interview, in fact, Donald Trump was asked if he would defend the Constitution or if that was part of his job. I'm paraphrasing here, and he said, "I don't know, I'm not a lawyer." When you heard that, what did you think?
It was another eye-rolling event, but you have to take what he says in jest as being serious. And when we have that time where the administration ignores a Supreme Court order, we are at what we call a constitutional crisis. Because ultimately, all the courts can do is send out the marshals. The marshals are under the Justice Department. So the court and the opinions of the court, like them or dislike them, need to be respected. I've lost any number of cases where I'm so frustrated with what the judge has said or done. And in one instance, I let my lips get ahead of my brain. I engaged my mouth before I engaged my brain. But I immediately apologized to the judge, because we have to respect the law.
So far, has that respect been shown to judges? There have been a lot of decisions and a lot of rulings against the administration. Can you talk about those? Because, for example, the judge who ruled that the plane carrying those individuals to El Salvador needed to turn around in midair or whatever, and that wasn't obeyed by the administration.
The way they didn't obey it was to say that they didn't know where the plane was. They gave various excuses that the judge, found less than credible. But the important fallout about that is that now the courts are requiring due process to be given to these people before we ship them off to a foreign land where they will be, possibly tortured, possibly killed, and they will not be. They are here in America, and they deserve the rights that any person in America has.
What about all those people, though, who are in the jail in El Salvador under really horrible conditions? Now, some people will say, oh, they were dangerous gang members, but there's no evidence of that.
There's no proof of that.
And so do they have any legal recourse?
At this point, it's still being fought in the court system, but it's going to be difficult to get them back from El Salvador to America. And that's the problem. And that's what the courts have said. You have to give them due process before we abduct them off the streets or at various other places or at courthouses where ICE is now going to take people.
What do you think about the judge who was arrested?
That's a complicated factual issue, but this I do know to be true. It is intimidating people from showing up at court. And there are many of us who believe that it was a clear sign to judges of intimidation. The judge has been charged with some very serious crimes. Lawyers are on her side about this because we cannot have this happening where you're invading the courthouse to enforce these immigration issues that it's more of a policy issue that's happening here now too. And it's the policy of the administration.
We'll talk about that because in many cases, the administration as I understand it, is arguing that district court judges don't have jurisdiction over federal policy, correct?
That's a very unique argument, and
But you're hearing rumblings about that,
yes,
yes?
and it's a contorted reading of the Constitution. It goes something like this: a district court judge lacks the power to issue a nationwide order. And there have been suggestions from some conservative scholars that only the Supreme Court can issue a nationwide injunction against the president. That has never been something that's been tested before, because it's never something that we've had to worry about before. And again, I use the word unprecedented, but we cannot normalize this type of behavior. We can't normalize ignoring court orders. We cannot normalize chastising judges, calling them by the particular judge or the particular president that appointed them. And that's one thing that we lawyers have been asking the media to stop doing too. Stop identifying a judge by the president that appointed him or her.
Why is that so important in your view?
Because it suggests that the judges are political. And that's not the message that needs to go out. The judges, to the best of his or her ability, are trying to follow the rule of law. Like it or dislike it, they are trying to be consistent with the Constitution. But when you start saying that they were a Nixon appointee, an Obama appointee, a Ford appointee, and I'm a Trump appointee, a Bush appointee, it bastardizes what the judges really are. They're trying to do their best job under the factual scenario that's given to them. And they do not deserve, as I indicated before, because they ruled against the administration, to have their children have pizzas delivered to their house as a sign of intimidation. I've had a colleague say to me, the colleague is a judge, and the colleague has said, I really hope that I don't end up with one of these Trump cases. And I asked the colleague, and I don't want to identify anything about the person, and I asked the colleague, why is that? The colleague said, I have 2 children who do not live in the area, and I'm concerned for their safety. I was shocked, but then I wasn't shocked. Who thought that becoming a federal judge would put your children's lives in jeopardy merely because of a ruling?
If in fact the ultimate decider, if you will, of the legality of Trump administration's policies is the Supreme Court, that of course is the big question, isn't it, Joe? How will the Supreme Court decide on some of the thorniest issues that we are facing? What do you think?
I think that the Supreme Court has been surprising people with the way it's been thinking and the way it's been ruling and the way certain justices have decided cases. At the end of the day, I like to think, and I have to be hopeful, that they will be true to the rule of law and to the Constitution. I was speaking to your producer earlier. We have to be hopeful, because this fragile democracy that we have depends on the separation of Congress, the administration, and the courts. If the courts abdicate their duties and abdicate their responsibilities, we're in trouble. And this experiment that we've been working on, it will fail.
Meaning democracy.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about the Department of Justice. It seems to me there has often been a political undercurrent at DOJ, right? They're supposed to be independent, but we had Bobby Kennedy as Attorney General.
It started way back in the 60s.
Right? And I think at various times in our recent history, there has been this air of partisanship, right, within the Department of Justice. I think Merrick Garland actually went so far out of his way to appear that he was not partisan, that he was criticized for dragging his feet in certain instances. Is that an accurate?
I'm glad you said that, because I think that was his problem. He erred on the side of being overly cautious because he did not want to appear to be political. And in not appearing to be political, he was political. And that we can start with the federal charges against President Trump and how he dragged his feet on that. And it took New York to get started on this, which still dragged their feet. So the politicalization of the Department of Justice, it's something of concern. But what you see is the line prosecutors, the career prosecutors who are not political, they've been true to their oaths. They have resigned.
They're getting fired, right?
They've been fired, but they're being true to their oaths. Let me bring that back to the large law firms who agreed to do what the administration asked them to do. Those were billion-dollar corporations. We have federal prosecutors who are making nowhere near the amount of money, who have said, rather than prosecute someone for political reasons, I will quit or you will fire me because I'm true to my oath.
I interviewed a woman at the Justice Department who was given a case about Mel Gibson and if he should have his gun rights restored. And he had been, I guess, convicted of domestic violence. And there were some pretty harrowing audio tapes as well. After analyzing the evidence, she said she didn't think it was a smart idea for him to have a gun, own a gun. And essentially, she was fired for that decision.
Kudos to her. And that's what I mean. Courage. We need courage.
But don't you think that's outrageous?
Oh, it's clearly outrageous. It's clearly outrageous. But the good thing is you have shined a light onto those instances where things like that are happening. And again, it starts a movement. What right-minded listener of yours is listening to this broadcast right now who says that a person who has been convicted of domestic violence, who has lost his rights to have a gun, the president should be able to tell the Justice Department, he's my buddy, he's my friend, give him his gun back. We don't even have to imagine what something like that would do. It is, as you said, outrageous. But kudos to her.
A lot of people who follow me are feeling hopeless and helpless. And they often say to me, what can we do? What would your answer to that be, Joe?
That we can go out. There are people who have been protesting in any number of kinds of ways, whether it's protesting against Tesla, and I'm not suggesting anything negative against Tesla or that you go out and hold a sign.
Well, you're not
up.
suggesting you like key Teslas or light them on
I
fire.
Never.
And I think
would
it's
do
okay
that.
to say negative things about Tesla
Yes.
personally.
I agree. I used to have a Tesla and I got rid of it.
Oh, I'm so glad I didn't buy one.
But what we can do is we can continue to talk to our congresspeople, to talk to our senators. Voting just isn't enough. That's just the beginning of democracy. Democracy means being active. It means being active in organizations. It means being active in public service organizations. That's what true democracy looks like. It means organizing. One voice can make a difference. And that's what I keep saying. Your voice can be heard and your voice can make a difference. Speak up and do something. I am very hopeful that when America really fully appreciates what's going on, that this will stop. And what I often say is a majority of voting Americans elected the president, but not a majority of Americans elected the president.
So we have to educate people and really go back to basic civics as you started this conversation.
Yes.
And let people understand the whole concept of checks and balances and the importance of having a strong judiciary to, in fact, check and balance what the administration and Congress are doing.
Katie, I can't say it any better than what you said it. That is absolutely what we need. And again, I want to emphasize this isn't a President Trump issue. This isn't a Hillary Clinton issue. It's not a Kamala Harris issue. This is a democracy issue. And I would be here saying these exact same things if Biden were elected, if Kamala Harris were elected, and they were doing the same things. The same outrage would be happening by me and by the International Academy of Trial Lawyers, because we want to make sure that the promotion of the rule of law is always done. We want to make sure the judiciary is always protected and respected.
Joe Tucker, thank you so much.
Katie, thank you so much for giving me this brief time to talk to you, and I appreciate all your listeners who are listening. I want to again end with, I am hopeful. I am hopeful because of platforms like this. I'm hopeful because of people who I talk to that we are going to make it through this time period.